Oh,
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Santa Monica KTC's weekly Zoom Sangha, virtual Sangha. We're really pleased to have you here with us tonight, Lama Adam. Thank you for joining,
thank you.
and thanks everybody else for joining. If you'd like to learn more about Santa Monica KTC and what we have to offer and different membership levels that we have, you can check us out online, santamonicakTC.com. And lastly, if you would like to make a donation towards Lama Adam's teaching this evening, you can do so by using the link on our website for donations for teachers, and you will see his name on that. Or you can click the link on the newsletter that everyone receives. You probably received one this evening for tonight's Sangha. If everyone could just mute their microphones while Lama Adam's speaking, that would be great. And I'll hand it over to you, Lama. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're starting a new series tonight, and um, I've found lately that if I want to read something and really have some time to dig into a certain teaching, I have to teach it because otherwise I'm probably not going to read it because there's other things happening. So, um, or I have to read whatever I am teaching. So this is kind of guiding my topics in a lot of ways because it helps me to become more familiar with things and also like take deeper dives into certain areas. And um, Lojong is a field that I've always loved, and I generally have worked with the Great Path of Awakening, which is Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche's commentary on the 7 points of mind training by Chikawa Yeshe Dorje. And I have always liked Trungpa Rinpoche's commentary on that as well, which is called Training the Mind and Cultivating Loving Kindness. So I wanted to try something a little different this time and approach these teachings from his commentary. So I have Great Path sitting here too, as well as there's a number of books that cover this. You know, if you have a teacher that resonates with you, there's Enlightened Courage by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Heart of the Dharma by Trungpa Rinpoche is a wonderful book. Start Where You Are, Pema Chodron. Tralad Kyabgon Rinpoche's The Practice of Lojong. All of these are wonderful books on the Lojong teachings. But in particular, I noticed I've gotten into a little bit of not a rut, but a little bit of a kind of what we were talking about with this intention thing. I noticed when I've been teaching Great Path, I've been kind of falling into doing the same thing again and again. And so I kind of wanted to freshen it up, like make it novel again, and see what happens. So as we move through these teachings over the next couple months, I think that I want this to be pretty a dialogue heavy series because I think that the point of these teachings is to bring them into daily life. And I have been being very conscious lately about um, using the construction of formal practice and applied practice as opposed to on the cushion and off the cushion. And the reason for that is that I think so much of the obstacles to integrating practice and really using our applied practice to support our formal practice and our formal practice to support our applied practice, the obstacles to that are thinking that they're different, thinking that there's a whole like other approach we have to use and it's a separate thing. And when we use phrases like on the cushion and off the cushion, like first of all, we're making it about cushion, like it's about that place where maybe we are 5 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, an hour a day. But for most of us, that's not most of the day that we're on that cushion. And when we're away from the cushion, I don't know that we're supposed to be thinking about the cushion. I think we're supposed to be engaged in the present moment wherever we are. And so, similarly, I think there's a little, I think it can be deceptive in a way. I mean, I don't mean anyone's deceiving anyone, but I know constructions like meditation and post meditation That's one of the ways that we've been translating things for a while now. And I think that's another kind of deal where on both ends, there's potential for confusion because meditation starts to seem like something that we have to put all this effort into and create this state of meditation. And then when that's over, that's gone. And now we're in this post meditation phase where we don't have the meditation or the effort we were doing. And I think in both cases, it creates a little misunderstanding. So I just, I really like this approach. I don't know if anyone else will adopt it, but I really like thinking of it as formal practice and applied practice. And the reason why I went that route is because, if you think of formality, you're really creating a situation, and in a way performing. You're really kind of doing something for the way it looks in a somewhat contrived way. And that's not bad necessarily. Like we have to do that. I think for meditation, it becomes in particular the chance to isolate certain skills and create an environment in which there's enough contrast to see our own challenges or see our habitual thought patterns pretty clearly in a way that is not as clear when we're in our applied practice. And the applied practice being like applied because that's where you put it to work. So in a way, like that's where the rubber hits the road is the applied practice. The formal practice definitely matters, but the applied practice is where we spend most of our day, and it's where we really need these practices the most. And I mean, I could talk about this for a while. All these things are coming to my head. Like, for instance, like practice also emphasizes the ongoing nature of the situation, that there's a process happening, and practice includes some imperfection. Practice has room for failure and trying again, and, formal practice in a way is like the potentiator, I think, for our applied practice. Because in a way, I mean, we could say that I'm just going to try to be mindful all day long. And why would I need a formal practice? Just I have daily life and I'll just try to be present. And I think there's definite value in that approach. But if we're not taking even a little bit of time to isolate those skills of mindfulness and awareness and compassion, things like that, then we never really get that chance to see them clearly and to see our impediments to them clearly in that contrived environment of a formal practice. So I've really kind of been thinking about formal practice as being the potentiator of applied practice, meaning like for most practices, the vast majority of our day. And if we can do even just a little bit of the formal practice, it supercharges the applied practice. And there is no other set of practices I know of that so well bridge that gap as Lojong and the teachings of mind training. So Lo means like mind or intellect, and Zhang is training. So these teachings are they mean mind training, and central to these is bodhicitta. Bodhi meaning awakening, chitta meaning mind. So we're generating this mind of awakening. And bodhicitta is a really interesting word. I'm thinking maybe we ought to talk about bodhicitta just for a minute, because I think it's kind of funny how like we talk about it as a thing, and we also talk about it as like a practice, and we also talk about it as like our nature. It's kind of it can mean so many different things, and we use it so many different ways. But mind training is really about developing that mind of awakening, bodhicitta, in both of its aspects, and those aspects being the relative aspect and the ultimate aspect. And in particular, there are two main formal practices in Lojong. There's what in the Great Path, Ken Holmes translates as the associated meditation of ultimate bodhicitta and the principal meditation of relative bodhicitta. So there are another core part of this is the 59 slogans, and those are attributed to Atisha. Chikawayashi Dorje compiled them and put them into the root text of the 7 points of mind training. And we nowadays most often refer to Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary, The Great Path of Awakening. And Lojong is this powerful practice that translates the formal and the applied, or it kind of translates the formal practice to the applied practice and the applied practice to the formal practice. And that formal practice is principally tong-len. And as many of us probably know, that's taught often without the full context of Lojong. A lot of times people will learn tong-len before they dive into the full mind training teachings. And that can sometimes cause some impediments too. And we'll talk a little about how that happens. But the associated meditation on ultimate bodhicitta is really challenging. And it's interesting because it is one of those things that really should be done with a teacher. And I try to tell people not to read Great Path of Awakening on their own, simply because it is so pithy and so concise that, like, when you get to that associated practice of ultimate bodhicitta, if you don't have guidance, it is just a really rich area for misunderstanding and kind of taking things the wrong direction and potentially making people feel a little defeated, because but I don't want to go too much into that now. But one thing I think that's interesting about this ultimate practice is I know of teachers who do not teach that publicly. They only teach it in a one-on-one format, and I could definitely see the reason for that. I've also received teachings where, like, oh, I'm forgetting the name right now, but yeah, I've definitely received teachings too where I was told that you can never teach the principal meditation of tong-len without the ultimate practice. And I can see the reason for that too, because I think when we do the practice of tong-len, which is also known as the practice of taking and sending, it's kind of the hallmark of Lojong practice. Briefly, to briefly describe it, we're taking on the suffering of others and giving away our own happiness. I think without the context of ultimate bodhicitta, which is more of an insight practice into the way, into emptiness, what the actual ultimate situation is. If we don't have that aspect, that context of ultimate truth, then it can cause us to become even more fixated on the relative truth and even more fixated on suffering and loss and things like that. And so I think, I'm not saying that no one should ever learn tong-len without the ultimate practice. I mean, I think it's good to start with tong-len, but I think it's important to soon after that start to get the context of the ultimate practice, or else, it's possible to start to run into some obstacles. So I have a hunch. I know where this is going to, most people's answers here, but I do want to ask, like, who has done tong-len before? Hands. I think I probably should say, has anyone not done tong-len before? Which is probably not the case. And so I want to ask first, like, to bring this down to earth and into the room, does anyone, or would anyone be willing to share specific benefits that they noticed, particularly in the beginning using tong-len? Like when you first had that novel experience of a practice of tong-len, benefits that you might have noticed, or like what kept you doing it, what kept you going back to tong-len?
Having a lot more compassion for everybody and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Can you say
feeling,
more about that?
Just like being able to look at somebody who might just be having a really tough time, or a person who might just be super angry and mad and maybe attacking, and being like a lot more understanding, compassionate about that
Yeah,
all the time,
yeah,
which makes it easier to kind of cruise through the world like that instead of taking that on.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Yeah, that's good. Anyone else want to share one?
I will.
Hmm.
Sometimes when I'm feeling really self-absorbed and worrying a lot and feeling a little exasperated or frustrated, I say, wait a minute, why don't I just think and have empathy for all the people who feel like I do right now?
Yeah,
And so then I'm like imagining that since I have this worry, frustration, feeling like antagonized by things I need to do, then I say, wait a minute, just let me breathe in all that other people are feeling, because they don't even have this awareness that I have. Like, I don't have the awareness all the time, but what a gift to just relax for a moment and just imagine that I have empathy for all these people that are going through the same thing but have no way out.
yeah. I love that. Yeah, and I think in that moment too, we kind of go from this lonely place of suffering to this connected place of understanding.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah. So then I'm feeling frustrated, but at least I'm connected to a lot of other people.
Yeah, yeah. It may not be our favorite place, but we're not alone. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. Tara, did you have one?
Yeah, I find that it sort of helped me create more of a feeling of fearlessness, that I don't have to be afraid of my suffering or anybody else's suffering, that I can take it in and send out my happiness because of the emptiness aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. And I think that does, it's funny to think about how that relates right back to the Four Noble Truths too. This idea of um, being able to let go of our clinging, and I think that's a very it just makes sense to work with letting go of our own happiness in a practice. It's got to start somewhere, and really most meditation in the moment is a low stakes situation, and I think tong-len ideally is that, at least in practice. I mean, obviously big things happen, and tong-len can help us through very difficult times too, but I think I probably said this before, but one of my favorite Rinpoche quotes is, I didn't actually hear him say this, but Lama Tsultrim Gyaltsen told me he said this. He said, when it's time to, I'm cleaning this up, when it's time to use the bathroom, it's too late to build the outhouse. And and so I think that, yeah, I think if we can do a practice of meditation in preparation for the difficult times, it's going to be a lot more effective. And we're actually working with low stakes situation. And yeah. So my next question is like obstacles to Tonglen. Um, has anybody had any um, doubts or trouble or um, misunderstandings or just general potential obstacles that you might be willing to share? I understand if that's things you don't want to share in a public forum, but I'm curious if anybody has anything they would want to share.
I have one. So if it's
Hmm.
a really bad person, it's really hard for me to do that with the person.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's really hard. I don't know. I
yeah.
try.
So people with that you're having difficulty with?
Oh, just like public figures. Let's say there's a really bad one there that
Okay.
does bad. It's like it's really hard to do Tonglen. You know, I'm talking like big
Yeah.
time, not just small, like petty things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that reminds me of like I think it was Sharon Salzberg who talked about she was talking about the meta practice in particular, but she talked about how when you work with that type of person that you're having difficulty with, the challenging people, um, that like you found the edge of your compassion.
Oh,
Like
that's a
in
good
that person, you found the outer barrier of your compassion. And that doesn't necessarily make it easier, but
yeah.
I like that because it explains something. You know, it's I mean, and it makes sense because I think we all know, unless there's a Buddha in the room, we all know that we don't have that impartial compassion manifest yet. So it would make sense that at some point we're going to bump into the walls of our, you know, or the boundaries of where our compassion is. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you did you ever get any good advice about working with that?
Um, I may have in the past. Yeah, I forgot, to be honest.
Yeah, I
There's,
mean, it's funny because oh, go ahead.
no, I'm gonna close the window. There's helicopters outside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that
Sorry.
no, no problem. Yeah, it is the way this is taught. Um, well, let's come back to that because I think what I have to say next will kind of relate to that too, and we can talk more about obstacles too in a bit. But um, so, like I said, I'm using Trungpa's Training the Mind book as my guide here. And in the intro to that, they explain how he introduced tong-len and the Lojong teachings. And as you may know, Trungpa was one of the first Karma Kagyu teachers to come and really establish, you know, plant the flag of Dharma in the West. And he introduced the 59 slogans at his Vajradhatu seminary, which is like I think like a 3 month maybe or three. It was very significantly long teaching that he did every year for many years. And he introduced it at the seminary in 1975. And if you know the Chogyam Trungpa timeline, he came to the US in 1970. So he taught for 5 years before he ever introduced just the slogans, just the Lojong slogans. Um, in subsequent years, he started to expand on those slogans and how to apply them in daily life. It wasn't until 1979 that he taught tong-len. So I have a guess, just because we're all lineage buddies, you know, lineage brothers and sisters, like that we all probably learned tong-len first year or something that we were hanging out around the community, you know. But I want to just bring this up because I do think there has been a lightning fast increase in access to Dharma. And I was going to say, I think we see, but I have seen the adverse effects of that too. So I just want to point out because there are, you know, we're all trying to find our way with this new technology, really. It may not be new technology, but it's new to our culture. And we have like really sped up access to this stuff dramatically. And so even just, what is that, like 50 years ago, you know, it took 9 years of Trungpa working with students before he introduced to them just tong-len, you know. Before that, it was the slogans and working with the slogans, but he really wanted to make sure that people had a solid grounding in sitting practice before they moved on to that. And in fact, he would, I think, wait, let me find where I wrote my notes about this. Yeah, so he really emphasized the importance of the oral tradition and meeting with the teacher to get these instructions one-on-one. And that's something I really recommend. I think that there are a lot of teachings that are given now throughout all of Buddhism that make me a little squeamish, you know, that they're just out there. And the reason is not because I'm protective of a secret, you know. The reason is because I think there is a right time and place for practices to come into people's lives. And I think that they should be shared by a teacher who knows their students, who really knows what the student is going through, what the student is looking for, what their limitations are, what their potential confusions are. But at the same time, there's a real benefit to access to, so this is, I'm not saying it's one or the other. I just want to highlight, there's always kind of two ways of looking at things. A little side note here, I went to a seminar recently through the Cheetah House, which is the nonprofit for meditators in distress. And they had a program called My MAP, My Meditation Assessment Protocol. And it was really cool because what it was like it was very interesting for me. Like the first step, we made a spreadsheet, and the first step was write down all the goals you have for your meditation, everything you want to get out of meditation. And first of all, that was kind of interesting because I hadn't really thought about that in a while. And that's another reason why we started the meditation today with like, what is your goal? Like what is an intention you have? Like, what do you need right now? Because I think in the beginning, take a moment and think back about like the first time you went to get a meditation lesson, what were you looking for? And one of the reasons I think that's important is because I think a lot of times we kind of get swept into the stream of a community or a set of practices. And like, for instance, I was not looking for a comprehensive worldview when I went to get meditation instruction, but I definitely picked one up, along the way. And that's not a bad thing, but it wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. That was, in fact, I was totally not looking for that. But, I happened to find one and adopted it. But in a way that wasn't mindful, it wasn't really a mindful adoption of that. I kind of just went with the flow. And I think a lot of times we end up kind of further down that stream of practice without really knowing how it connects to where we started. So I think there's a lot of value in kind of examining, what am I doing this for? And I think the reason that's important is because we do hear again and again this goal of Buddhahood, this goal of enlightenment. And it's an important goal. It's really important to know our destination. We have to know where we're going in order to take the steps to get there. But I think that it has the potential sometimes to put us to sleep a little bit, because we're no longer thinking about those immediate goals. We're no longer thinking like, what do I need from my practice day to day? And I think it's good to have those ultimate goals, but I do think it's really important to check in with where we're at day to day and whether the practices we're doing actually meet that need. And in particular, to really pay attention to whether the practices are leading to a reduction in clinging and grasping and afflictive emotions. Because I think probably a lot of us have seen people who practice a lot and maybe are getting crabbier, or maybe are getting pickier. I know for me, like when I went into the 3-year retreat, like, I had something to think to, I was going to say I have something to say. I didn't say it often, but I had a lot to think about what everybody else was doing, and there was a point where because we're learning a ton of ritual and right ways of doing things and wrong ways of doing things. And I think any kind of ritual or practice that you do with others, you may start to get critical of what others are doing. And I noticed that I was kind of misusing the practices or my knowledge of them to judge other people, and generate negative emotions. So I think it's really important to kind of see how we're using the practices and if they're meeting our goals, and if they're not, to talk to a guide about what might be going wrong in the way we're doing the practice, or if a practice is the right practice for us at that point in time. If there's a alternative practice that meets the same goals but fits our own abilities and limitations better. So I think it's just really important to all of this to say, like, I think everyone should be checking in with the teacher occasionally. that sort of one-on-one dialogue is the best thing we can have on the path. And that's how most people, I believe, did it for a very long time. Again, we've kind of sped into having access to all of these practices, and we have KTCs all over the country, and they're all webcasting. We have lots of teachers, and there's just so much Dharma we can absorb. And I think having that personal connection is still really important. So moving on, we have these slogans, these 59 slogans. So these slogans that are like the backbone of Lojong are to be memorized. So if you have Great Path, you know that there's several lists of slogans in there. The point I want to make is that those are not slogans that we have so that we can look them up on the phone when we need them. That's not really what they're for. They're there so that we can memorize them enough that they become like intimately integrated. So much so that when we need one, it just appears through spontaneous recall. So that's really what those are for. And so I know you can buy cards, like I think Pema Chodron has like slogan cards and stuff like that. But what I would recommend is that you make your own cards. I mean, there's a lot of educational science behind writing things down to improve your memory and stuff. So I have made my own cards at least 3 or 4 times. And sometimes I'll just make a new set just because I want to remember them better, and that's another way to do it, is to make the set again and write it down again. So I would really recommend, if you want to start to work through this series of teachings kind of as its own practice or series, that you get some index cards and make your own slogan cards. And I would recommend you do that with like one side as the slogan, and then the back side being your notes on that slogan. So for instance, some of these slogans are like, never forget the 5. And of course, like, I don't remember the 5. I have to go look at my card and see what the 5 are. So like those kind of things, like the back of the card is the things that you need to remember about the 5, or maybe like an alternative translation that you like better, or that is better informs the one on the other side. Because that's another neat thing to do, is like look at different people's translations of these slogans. They can be very different. For instance, there's the be like a musician, be like a magician, or see the world as a sorcerer. There's just different ways of wording these, and one may resonate with you more than the other. But I think that's really, to me, like the jumping off point of this. And the reason I say that is because I'm using this Trungpa book as the guide, and that's how he started, and we also know that the lineage of this teaching started with the slogans, so I think beginning with the slogans is the place to start. And I don't think you have to understand them all to make the cards. I don't think you have to know what all 59 mean exactly to make the cards, because we're going for this recall, this spontaneous recall of these slogans. So I think it's okay to, like, right now, even if you haven't been through the book in a while or at all, to just make all 59 right now. And I think that's a good practice. I think it's a meritorious practice. And it starts that process of retention too. And then another point that is made in the book is that these slogans are a great jumping off point, but they're not to be like leaned on as crutches. So again, this is like, we're really bringing together formal and applied practice. We're bringing together the formality of these slogans in the teaching, and we're bringing that together with traffic, or having to cook dinner, or your roommate leaving their clothes on the floor, whatever thing it is, like, we're bringing these into daily life. So yeah, it's a bit entertaining too, how as you move through the slogans, they don't necessarily undermine each other, but each one kind of clarifies a previous one, or maybe like clears away a potential delusion that could come up from that previous slogan. So there is a progression to them, but yeah, I think that I wanted to try to get back around. Lisa, remind me again, like we were talking about challenging individuals, right?
Yeah, right. Like extremely, not just
Yes.
little challenges, like that's fine, but like, yeah, when like it creates
Players
like,
on the world stage.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it would
Hmm.
affect a lot of people, not just me. Like kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think, and that is, I think, kind of the most common obstacle with this practice. And to me, it indicates I think it indicates, number one, like I said, where that boundary of compassion is, but it also indicates like a little bit of imbalance towards the relative rather than the ultimate. And so I think that the more we're able to just do the associated practice of ultimate bodhicitta, the easier that can get, because that ultimate practice is where we connect with interdependence and impermanence and illusory nature of things. And that's a big part. I mean, that is the realm in which tong-len lives. I mean, it's the realm in which everything lives, but I think tong-len can easily become this very relative practice of like wanting to help beings. And that's why, like, a lot of times, like when I close out, oh, we didn't do a reference prayer, I forgot about that. I was gonna say talk about the dedication, but we made intentions, so we'll count that as the refuge prayer today. But yeah, when we do a dedication at the end, we try to do the relative aspect, which is that, by this merit may all beings obtain omniscience. And we have this very relative aspect of like, there's a bunch of beings, I'm a being, I can help beings, we can all go from here to there. There's this relative, dedication. And then after that is the one where we talk about Manjushri and Samantabhadra and knowing things just as they do, which is really saying that, like, even though it appears that I'm separate from these beings and some beings are happy and some are suffering, Samantabhadra knows, like that this is illusory and all of these things are interdependent and impermanent. And we have to be able to hold both of those views in harmony. And I think that's really the key, is harmony, not opposition. And I was talking to a class this morning about mindfulness, and the question came up, like, how did he phrase the question? I mean, I was using the traditional John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness definition: purposeful attention, present moment, without judgment, and talking about how when we do that, we inevitably notice reactivity and past and future thinking and judging. And so the question was kind of like, well, how do we actually get it to be purposeful attention in the present moment without judging? And I think this is related to that, this ultimate and relative thing, because it's never going to be just one. Like, that's kind of the whole deal. Like, it's always going to be both. And what we can do is increase our awareness of that and our compassion towards that. We can to tie it in with the title, like, we can increase our wisdom of that and our compassion about that. We know that that's the case. It's not an awful thing. There has to be a way forward where that's beautiful and workable. And I think that that's really the path, is like recognizing that awareness can contain, paradox. Awareness can contain things that seem to be in opposition, but are actually reliant upon each other and in harmony, in union. So yeah, I think that's one of those things where like, I mean, just to put it a little more simply, like, that's where we have to, with challenging people, that's where we really have to notice, number one, we may not be in a position to do that kind of practice, that variety of tong-len. And that's definitely the case. Like, a lot of times, like, for instance, again, Great Path is super pithy and concise. And so it explains how to do, like, kind of all the varieties of tong-len in a page and a half, but that in practice could be, a year or two of working through these things to get to the point where we can work with a difficult person in that practice. But the second part of that is, if we have a pretty strong familiarity with ultimate truth, obviously it's not stabilized, or we're not realized beings, but if we are really beginning to see the illusory nature of things, then there's not a lot of difference between the person who's our friend and the difficult person. So it becomes like, it's the equalizer, that ultimate truth is kind of the equalizer of things. And yeah, and then the other thing is, this is like maybe not exactly what you were talking about, Lisa, but like I think when we breathe in, one of the instructions that Tuku Damchu, that was the teacher I was trying to remember earlier. Tuku Damchu, one of the things, he gave us a really beautiful teaching on Lojong and retreat. And he talked about how, like, when you breathe in, it's big, whether you're breathing in or out, like it's small in here, it's actually coming from nothing in your heart center. And it sort of appears and gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it comes out. And then when the suffering comes in, it's huge and gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappears in your heart center by the power of your bodhicitta. So when you breathe in, you're not collecting anything. And when you breathe out, it's not like there's something there that you're all of a sudden taking away from yourself. It appears that way because we're working with the appearance and the relative truth. But there is nothing, like 2 breaths in is not twice as much suffering that's now in your body, and that's why we can continually breathe out our happiness too, because it just is there each time. And so I guess one way I guess maybe one bit of advice I would give just to close is that, like, we talk about this as a practice of taking and sending, but I really like to think of it as like a practice of recognizing that we are enough. And what I mean by that is, like, we have enough happiness that we can give it away again and again and again, and it's never going to run out. It's just continually there to give away, because it's coming from emptiness, and it appears because we choose for it to, and it becomes enough for all beings. And similarly, we are strong enough to take on any amount of suffering. It doesn't matter how much it is, it still comes right into this mouth and right down this throat into nothing, So I feel like that's another way of looking at what tong-len does, is recognizing that we have enough happiness for everybody, and we have enough strength to be present with any amount of suffering. Does it play out like that in the moment in applied practice? No, but probably not for most of us. But that's why we need to do the formal practice. That's why this is really very much a formal practice kind of thing. But then we have all these slogans, which is funny because when you go through Great Path, you get past tong-len and the ultimate bodhicitta practice in like 7 pages, and then the rest of the book is all, how do we do this in daily life? So that's a whole other kind of side of the practice. We can take tong-len into daily life, but if we try to like really live tong-len, meaning like truly taking on the suffering of others in real life, that's a much heavier lift and not recommended. That's why we need to do it as a practice, and it's super powerful. But yeah, I think that's another place where people potentially overextend themselves, is thinking that like what we do in the formal practice of tong-len needs to be done literally in real life, where yes, ultimately we can do that, but we need to recognize right now where we're really at and what we can actually accomplish in real life to make that true. We can do our best, but at the same time, it's not going to be as easy off the cushion to take that suffering on and give the happiness away as it is in formal practice. We got a little bit of time left. Next time we can dive into the preliminaries. Guru Yoga. I love talking about Guru Yoga of Lojong. and the four thoughts, I think would be good stuff to talk about next time. But any thoughts or questions about things we talked about tonight, or anything at all?
I'm so glad you said that last thing, because sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not doing enough. Like maybe I'm not a good Buddhist because
Like
I'm not doing enough to help
in
people
daily
who,
life, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm an awful Buddhist because I
Yeah.
should be doing something that's so much better than, like, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't thought about this in a long time, and I have to kind of re-examine if I think this is correct. But I used to say to people in the beginning, like, I said I'm Buddhist, not Buddha.
Oh
So
yeah, good
like,
one.
and you
Yeah.
know what I mean is like I'm training here, like I'm doing my best, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, but that's where I think like seeing the little, and that's another, to jump back to the intention thing in the beginning, that's another reason why I think connecting the ultimate goals to the daily life is so important. Because somebody was telling me the other day about how they hadn't been doing a lot of meditation, but there was a point where they were in their house and their kids were yelling and messing up the living room or something, and they had that moment where they felt the anger coming up, but they saw it coming, you know, and were able to let it go. And like, I think those moments are moments of enlightenment. Like that's a moment of awakening. Like in that, like you can't discount that. Like in that moment, like that's your Buddha nature shining through, you know, like that is it. And I know for a fact, like Rinpoche said multiple times in our retreat, that we all have had experiences of ultimate truth. Maybe not everybody, but most people have had at least a scant few um, real moments of being awake, and we can't discount that, you know. And so I know several of those for me, or what I think were those moments. And having heard him said that, I treasure those moments more than I did before. I always treasured them before because of kind of how they felt without a framework. But now that I have this Buddhist framework from Rinpoche and stuff, like I see that that was a moment of clear seeing, you know. And so I think that to me is like one of the ways that we keep going. It's not necessarily like comparing to perfection, but seeing these glimmers of light shining through, you know, seeing more and more of these glimmers of clarity as we move through life, and trying to have more of those, you know. I think, to me, I mean, in a way that's the Hinayana Mahayana approach, right? Because the Vajrayana, we take the view that we're already there, and we are talking about Lojong, which is a Mahayana approach. But so Mahayana kind of has this built-in assumption that we need to work towards that awakening. And so I think it is totally good to see the little steps we take and give them value, um, and just try to make more of those moments, because it really is just like moment to moment. You know, we have a second of either grasping or letting go. And yeah, Lisa, I'm sure you're not alone. I think we've all kind of had that experience of like falling short, and
Yeah.
yeah. Anyone else?
Well, related to what Lisa was saying, I know Mingyur Rinpoche has, and even Dongzar Khyentse Rinpoche as well, has made comments like, you know, where people have asked them, well, should I go off and build this what is it better to do, build this hospital or go on retreat for 3 years or whatever? And he says, you know, the answer is not certain. It's not certain that you know, doing something concrete like, you know, building a hospital or a school or whatever is necessarily contributing more or accomplishing more than going and sitting in a mountain retreat for 3 years by yourself or whatever. So there is that line of thought that I've heard from teachers before. So in the moments when I feel like, gosh, you know, I'm not really doing anything enough concrete, on the other hand, every day that I do my practice feels like at some level it's contributing something. And I've even had comments from my husband that he's noticed changes in me since I started meditating. So that's always a nice, encouraging thought.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that spouses are some of the biggest benefactors of Buddhist practice because it just makes for a nicer household, I think. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
that's
was
good. And I
even,
think also, Mhm.
oh, sorry, I just wanted to
Oh,
add
go
one
ahead.
more thing to that same statement, that it can also be a gift to other people. Because, the other day we were at Costco standing in line, getting ready to pay. And my husband and I were just we're smiling and chatting pleasantly with each other. And the guy behind us in line was like, "Oh, it's so nice to see a married couple smiling and speaking pleasantly to each other and, being happy," because I guess a lot of,
Wow.
and of course, my husband and I are older. And so I guess a lot of older couples, he says, "Oh, it's so nice not to see people bickering and, being sour and, all that kind of thing." And so I thought, oh, well, it's not only a gift to my spouse, it's a gift to strangers too, which I
Yeah.
thought was kind of inspiring.
Yeah, and how beautiful is it that you weren't even really trying to do anything in
Oh
that
no, I
moment?
wasn't, it was not conscious for sure. And it was interesting that this person noticed that and that he said something. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Yeah, a lot
that
of
was kind of,
interdependent factors.
yeah, it was kind of interesting.
That's neat. Yeah. And I think I can't remember why I thought of this, but I'll throw it out there just because it's been useful for me. It's like, oh, I know it was because of like deciding, mountain retreat or build a hospital kind of situation. Like, um, I feel like another reason why Lojong is really useful is in cultivating bodhicitta, that mind of awakening, um, really is kind of making the wish to benefit others the through line of all of our actions and thought. And again, I've found that when I start to get hung up on a decision, between this or that and the other thing, and I start to get a little stressed about which one's the right one or which one's going to benefit the most, um, the easiest thing for me to do rather than leaning in and trying to examine each option is to like lean back. I think of it almost like the couch of my intention, to like lean back into the couch of my, bodhicitta. And like if I can like lean back and relax into that intention of bodhicitta, then it becomes like not as important which, I know I'm going to make a good choice, at least a decent choice if the intention is the thing that's guiding my actions rather than my analysis, my careful analysis or pulling things apart. Like if I can just lean back into the intention, things get a lot easier decision wise. I think I would take one more question, or if anybody's got one. I know we're a little over, so we should probably wrap up soon. And if not, we'll pick up next time. I think that if you want to read along, that's great, but I'll try to make it so it doesn't matter if you are or not. And let's do, I don't have a PowerPoint today, but I think most people know the dedication. And if you don't know it, then just keep the wish that our time here tonight as a benefit to all sentient beings, and that through our practice, we can bring them to full awakening. By this merit, may all beings obtain the omniscience of Buddhahood and defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. And then let's briefly rest the mind. Okay. Thank you, California.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lama.
Ohio.
All right, see you all